Hello, good evening and welcome. It's One Slot. My name is Mazino Appeal. Now, artificial intelligence is reshaping government communication, but when it fails, the consequences can extend far beyond a technical era. Now, a U.S. State Department presentation at the International AIDS Conference displayed an AI-generated map that misspelled, misshaped, and mislabeled several African countries, including Nigeria, of all the countries. While Washington has accepted responsibility, the incident has reignited concerns about Africa's representation in global institutions and the risk of relying on AI without adequate human oversight. Now, coming amid debates over U.S. and global HIV funding and the future of PEPFAR, the controversy raises critical questions about diplomatic credibility, accountability, and also the responsibility, or rather the responsible use of AI in public policy. Today we ask, was this simply an editing mistake, or does it expose deeper flaws in how Africa is perceived and how AI is being deployed in global decision-making? Well, join us as we examine the implications for diplomacy, for technology, governance, and also international partnership. Now, my guests for today's program, we have a list of them, but we'll be starting with just a few. Currently joining us right now, we have Dr. Chinasa Okolo, founder and scientific director, Technecultura in Washington, United States. Dr. Chinasa Okolo, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Also joining her would be Dr. Alex Vine. Dr. Alex Vine is the Program Director, Africa European Council of Foreign Relations from London. Gentlemen and lady, you are welcome. Thank you very much for joining the program. We're expecting other guests, and as they appear, we will be introducing them as they come through. I'm being told that we have Professor Jelili, or we're expecting Professor Jelili. He'll be joining us shortly. But first off, let's start. Oh, yes. My apologies. Professor Jelili is with us. Professor Jelili Adebiyi, Development Scholar Practitioner. Professor Jelili, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the big smile. My apologies there for almost forgetting that you're with us. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor, while you're the last to show up, I'm going to start my questioning with you, if you do not mind. Some of these might be sentimental because Nigeria got misspelled, misshaped, and mispositioned inside of that AI map, and it really makes me, it peeves me. But Professor Jelili, as a development scholar, when you first saw that map, did you think it was just a simple technical mistake, or was it a reflection of deeper institutional attitudes towards Africa as a whole?
Yeah, thank you so much. When I saw the map, I just felt it's one of the things that we've been telling folks about when it comes to using artificial intelligence to generate maps. For many people, they believe that when you need to get something done immediately, what you need to rely on is different AI platforms. But they come with a lot of concerns, and they could actually be embarrassing. And I believe this is exactly what happened, because I follow the storyline, and the storyline is pretty consistent, because when they did an analysis of the map at issue, they realized that there is AI watermarks, which means that the person who did the revision to the particular slide at question must have thought that AI was going to generate an accurate map. And that shows that the individual doesn't have a good understanding of the capabilities and the limitations of AI. One of the biggest areas where AI is significantly disadvantaged, is when it comes to generating maps. Because when you look at the algorithms at the core of the inner workings of AI, they are based on probabilistic pattern matching. In other words, they are not based on the concept of spatial logic or what we call geometric truth. I teach human geography in the university. And what that means is that AI tools are not really good currently at actually projecting maps, because every single map we see there is based on certain forms of projection. And what that means is that you need to have the coordinate for you to be able to generate an accurate map. Unfortunately, there are certain things AI does not understand. One of these is geography. The other one is the concept of political borders. And AI does poorly when it also comes to the subject matter of physics. And part of this is because it lacked that structured geometry, and the other thing with AI, why it could not actually generate an accurate map is based on the concept of probabilistic averaging. So these are all concerns that the individual who did the revision to the map was not aware of. And the other thing is this, it also has to do with institutional issues. We are aware that there have been a lot of things happening in the US, especially when it comes to reducing the workforce. The government believes that in order for things to be done properly, more effectively from a cost perspective, there was a need to trim down what they consider the bloated size of the government agencies in the United States. And what that means is that in the process, it is possible, and we have seen occasions like this, whereby some of the intellectual warehouses of these major government institutions, they've been asked to leave. And what that means is that you'll be left with some individuals who may have the human knowledge so required to do due diligence when that particular map was generated. For me, the lesson is this. It's not just for the United States, because that's a global embarrassment right there. And I'm sure things will be done to make sure that such an embarrassment doesn't happen again to the country at the global level. But I think it's a time for us to contemplate a lot of this. I know a lot of folks who are working with the government in Nigeria. They rely on AI on almost everything that they do.
Professor Jelili, you're not wrong there. I've been to a local government area here in Nigeria that was run by AI. Trust me, there wasn't nobody in the office. But we're going to talk much about that. I want to turn to Dr. Chinasa Okolo. Dr. Okolo, first off, if you will please explain to us the premise with which you work. You are the founder and scientific director that's called Technecultura. Please, before I ask you the question, could you please explain to us the premise within which you work as a digital scientist? Am I correct, or do correct me?
Computer scientist, and so I do a lot of work focused on AI and policy, specifically centered on the African continent. I'm actually in Nigeria right now for an AI conference, but also looking at the geopolitical implications of AI more broadly as it relates to low and middle income countries.
Okay, so I want to know, now, do you think that this was simply an AI mistake, or do you think there are elements of human governance failures in there? Where do you, well, what sentiments do you have about this mistake that was made, and of course the implications as well?
Yeah, so the previous answer really gave a lot of insight. And as someone who's actually usually based in Washington, D.C., for the most part, I live there. I've been there for the past 3 years or so. We've seen the institutional decimation, of knowledge that has been in these respective agencies for decades, particularly with the shuttering of USAID. And a lot of those colleagues did a lot of work in tandem, with the State Department. And, I said on Blue Sky a couple of days ago, out of all the agencies within the U.S. government, you would expect the State Department to not make this mistake. And so generally it's an over-reliance of AI. A lot of agencies, pretty much every agency across the U.S. government has been tasked with adapting AI and also instituting chief AI officers. And alongside, as the professor also said, I think placing the blame on a last minute, insertion, I don't think that actually happened, because we know that usually when it comes to government, things happen through these review cycles, and the slides would have been finished pretty much a couple days, or if not a couple of weeks beforehand. And so it's an AI blunder that no one had the opportunity to catch, and maybe not even the knowledge to understand where these African countries actually are. So it's definitely a combination of different things.
So apparently they might be making decisions that we have no control over, or even decisions that they don't understand, because if they don't know logically or even logistically where these countries are, how so sure are we that the numbers are correct? Because these might also be AI generated. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere on there was the map of Wakanda. But how much of a risk does this pose, Dr. Okolo?
I would say, generally, when it comes to the actual damage caused, it's more so, reputational on the side of the governments, and also, understand how it impacts how the U.S. looks like on a global stage. I've read lots of different analysis, and I think that, we're starting to see how this impacts the U.S.'s relationships with African countries, with also, others that also relied heavily on aid. And as they start to see countries like China, for example, the UAE, and many others, as more viable partners, this blunder continues to dampen the relationship of the U.S. more broadly.
Okay. Dr. Alex Vine, you haven't been forgotten. Doctor, diplomatically, how damaging is this incident? How can, can what appeared to be a communications error actually undermine years of strategic engagement between the U.S. and any African government?
Well, the damage was already there with all the flip-flopping and different messaging from the Trump administration, the abolishment of USAID, the tariffs. I mean, just name it. There's a litany of things that have contributed to seeding significant doubts about sincerity and partnership with the United States, if indeed they were ever really there. So I don't think this has really worsened anything. It's just confirmed what people already knew, which is that the Trump administration has really pulled back its expertise on Africa. And so over-relying on AI with no human checking results in this sort of blunder. So, there's human error here. The map was not checked by a human, because anyone talking about this stuff would know that Nigeria is not landlocked and Mozambique is where it is, and so on. So I hope that the State Department and the US administration take the conclusion that they actually do need to invest in humans that have experience of the African continent. And indeed, there was a hearing on the Hill in Washington, which concluded on that. And in fact, the new Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs has been mandated to start rebuilding things that the Trump administration had demolished related to the Africa portfolio. So I think we're probably bottomed out in a trough, and there will be some increase now of hiring and rebuilding Africa expertise in the US administration, but rebuilding takes time. Having said that, a map of Africa is a pretty simple thing to get right. And so I hope this was such a shocking experience that it won't be repeated again. I mean, it did, as the profs at the beginning underlined, demonstrated that you can't rely on AI for graphics and maps. I just a few days ago used AI to complete a graphic, but I had to fact check everything and kept sending in corrections into it. In the end, it was fine, but you need the human in it. So that's the key here.
Yeah, but the U.S. continues to accelerate its investment in artificial intelligence. What do African countries need to do, seeing as we're being misrepresented?
Well, I mean, call out where there are errors, and African think tanks, African universities, the African media, you yourself calling and debating on this is important.
Well, calling out these errors,
you're going to be using AI a lot more. And so this isn't just an exclusively American problem. It is about ensuring that there's calibration of the information that's being taken place. I don't think AI is, been programmed to be inherently biased against the African continent. I don't think that at all. I think it's what we heard from the Prof. It's just the algorithms find it difficult to draw a map. And so the lesson from this is that when there are maps being drawn, you need to look at them very closely to ensure that they are accurate, that they are, because not only was this a stupid map, but they could also misinterpret a territory that could be used politically for disputes, these sorts of things. So, maps are really sensitive things. And this was a very, stupid kind of unenforced error that the US administration did. But again, I believe it's all about that they're not using humans enough because they have degraded their human capability on Africa. And I guess, less humans mean people really overstretched, and they did this AI map. They didn't check it, and they put it up. And I mean, it would have been a, extraordinary moment if I was in the audience and saw this map, I mean, unbelievable.
Unbelievable indeed, Dr. Vine. Thank you very much. Joining us now, Dr. Seydina Moussa-Ndiaye. He's the head Alive Research Group, Cheikh Hamidou Kane Digital University. Thank you very much for joining us. He's in Lagos here with us. Dr. Moussa-Ndiaye, thank you very much. I'd like to go straight up and ask you a question, Dr. Moussa. African universities and governments are rapidly embracing AI themselves. Now, what lessons should they take from this episode before integrating AI into the public administration of their spaces?
And I think that this is an example of why we should be very careful on using AI tools. I think that more we are growing, more AI tools are powerful and less people think that they need to check the result before using it. And I think that this is a great reminder that we should check every single result coming from AI tools. But I think the main thing we have to know about this event is that we think that we have a lot of data representing maps in Africa, and I think that it's not about the scarcity of the data used by different tools to train the models, but it's about the discoverability of African data. Because I'm not sure that if it was about describing the map of Europe or America, we will have the same error. And it means that we need to have more data available, but the AI tools developers should also do the best to discover more the data in internet, because African data are missing in most of training data used by those companies.
All right.
And we see that here, that the discoverability of data is something very important.
Very important
to think about.
Very important, Dr. Moussa-Ndiaye. Thank you very much. Professor Jelili Adebiyi, let me come back to you. Let's bring it back to Nigeria here. Now, I know we have our own fights to fight when it comes to fake agencies like the PFIPC. We're still checking how come that got through, the oversight and everything. But then again, still, there is this to note when it comes to AI and its use outside of the country. Could incidents like this gradually erode our trust? That's African governments and development partners, particularly where those partners remain heavily involved in health, in education, in governance programs. How much risks are we taking when we give them the reins and say, okay, fine, you get the data yourself, you send us in these, what you call them, documents. What do you think? How much risk?
Well, so for me, so let me back up a little bit. Traditionally, there have been concerns with the representation of African map, on a global map. And the reason is because Africa sits very close to the equator. And there's what we call the Mercator projector that was developed, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in 1959. So what it does is that it shrinks landmass very close to the equator. And that is why when you look at the maps that we use in teaching classes in most African universities, they're based on this Mercator projector. And when you look at the size of Africa, it is relatively smaller compared to places like Europe and North America. In other words, it shrinks the size of African map. Even there are occasions whereby there are concerns about projection, about the shape of certain African countries. And this could fit into what we call some aspect of the colonializing impact of maps. Because the thing about maps is this: maps are not value neutral. The people that develop this projection, they have a long impact in terms of influence on what is being represented by maps. And that is now bringing me to the conversation we need to be having. You see, there is no way we can beg our way to develop. Part of development and the reasons why we continue to remain dependent on development partners in North America and in Europe is because our government in Africa, they are refusing to do the right thing. They are not doing enough funding our home projection in Africa. What is African Union doing? Is it that they cannot fund research group? We have the experts. Let them develop projections upon which we can have accurate representation of African map. Nigeria should be taking the lead in this. Secondly, when you look at the issue of development, there is nothing called free lunch in development. There are trade-offs that comes with Africa needing support from other countries in the world. And what that means is that if you need support, you cannot come and determine the terms. You are a beggar in that relationship. And that is why when they said the USAID was unbundled, for me, it was like, okay, this is the time for us to begin to take issues seriously. The money that is being looted, especially in countries like Nigeria and in some other African countries, if we can be rechanneling such huge amount of money to generating data needed for development, because there's no way you can actually develop in modern times without investing heavily in the areas of data. We need to begin to take this conversation seriously. Outsourcing development data to major global institutions is a weakness, and it is high time we consider it as embarrassing to the continent. Okay. In fact, having this conversation is also embarrassing to me as somebody who's from Africa, who got educated in Africa, and is fully aware of the enormity of the human potentials we have across spectrums in Africa, in the academia, in private establishment, in government establishments as well. But we have refused to do the right thing, relying on the data that is coming from them. So if we can do the right thing, then we worry less about this because we have the data that we can use to advance our own development conversation. But now we are responding to a data generated by other people. And that is why the power asymmetry, we need to level it out. And for us to level it out, we need to begin to take funding development, especially the aspect of data, seriously. I've listened to Bill Gates on a number of occasions, and I did some big projects for Bill Gates Foundation when I was affiliated with Michigan State University. And one of the things I gathered, from some of our, the higher level professors back then that related with them is that whenever they need data about Africa, and even Bill Gates mentioned it in the public interview, they will refer to investors in the US.
Dr. Adebiyi.
They don't trust the data actually coming from Africa itself.
Dr. Adebiyi.
And that is why that aspect of it is something that we need to give some attention.
I hear you there. Africa needs to take responsibility. We need to bring our data forth and not wait for other countries, especially other continents, to help us with that. After all, they're getting it wrong now. Before we move on, I'd like to introduce Dr. Professor David Monda. Professor David Monda. He is a professor of political science, City University of New York. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. I'll come to you with your question, but I have a question for Dr. Chinasa Okolo first. Dr. Chinasa, I want to talk about minimum verification standards that African governments must have before they let these AI-generated representations of Africa hit public. What minimum verification standards should they apply or could be applied? Dr. Okolo?
Ryan's mentioned, really
Yes.
having humans in the loop to verify these outputs, because we cannot reliably, use AI as a verification tool. And so this is really what is important, particularly when it comes to African governments, and hopefully, African, policymakers and representatives in these respective institutions know the maps themselves. And so I think this is when it comes to maps, when it comes to data, this is really what humans have to be the ones to have the final say.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Okolo. Let's take a short break. We'll be back, and I'll be asking Dr. Monda the same question, and hopefully we'll be able to get him clearer this time. We'll be back. It's One Slot. Welcome back. It's One Slot. Now, it would seem oversight has taken a backseat when it comes to the administrations inside of the U.S. as AI-generated content continues to misrepresent Africa, the African continent, and the countries within it. This was the case as, well, very questionable maps made their way into serious consideration, or rather serious conversations that they shouldn't have recently, which has caused our conversation here today on One Slot. We have, just joining us, Professor David Monda. He is the Professor of Political Science, City University of New York. And Professor, before we went in that break, I was asking you, because we see that Africa, well, we've often complained about being misunderstood or maybe oversimplified. And I'm wondering whether this incident reinforces that narrative. Are we overreacting, or is this an isolated mistake?
Well, I don't think it's an overreaction. I don't think it's an isolated mistake. I think it's not only a major diplomatic gaffe, but it reinforces the challenge around how Africa is depicted, and more broadly, how the global South is understood within the United States. Because as much as OpenAI was responsible for generating that map, I think somebody somewhere should have figured out that Côte d'Ivoire, or the Ivory Coast, is not in Southern Africa, that it's in West Africa, that Nigeria is not in North Africa, it's in West Africa, right? And by basically looking at that map, even if it was an intern at the State Department, this is something that should have been sorted out. But I must say, I'm in higher education. I think this is a broader challenge we have within U.S. universities and U.S. education generally, whereby global history and global mapping is not very well done. For large stages of education in the U.S., there's almost a peripheralization of international affairs and global geographies. And I think this then definitely would manifest itself when you have employees or even an intern who, might boggle a very basic map in that way. And I must also add, our president, Donald Trump, has on many situations been referring, for example, to Nambia. He's quoted as referring to a country called Nambia when I believe he was either referring to Namibia or Zambia. So it's not quite sure which one of those he was speaking to. So this is, as much as it's an AI gaffe, but it also really reinforces this idea that Africa is not very seriously taken in terms of global discussions in Washington, and Africa has to return to become a priority.
Oh, Nambia, interesting. Might be the little baby for Namibia and Zambia then. Thank you very much, Professor Monda. Dr. Alex Vines, let's come back to you. I'm wondering if this controversy, if it could have been avoided. I mean, maybe stronger institutional quality control could have helped, do you think? Or does it expose a broader decline in standards generally when it comes to America?
Well, the first point is that only around 50% of Americans hold passports. So more or less half the population does not travel outside the US. And the Prof just mentioned that geography teaching is very poor in the United States. So if you look at, for example, President Trump, he has blundered a variety of times, not only on African geography, but European. He's mixed up Armenia with Albania. He's called Greenland Iceland, and he called the country Belgium a city. So this, I think, is indicative of a broader problem in the United States about how it sees the world. Scandal over this AI in designed map is just indicative of a much broader problem that the United States is facing. So the solution here is to actually improve geography teaching and awareness of the world within the classrooms and both at high schools and at universities of American students, as well as investing in humans to check AI and make sure that they're well educated and able to then calibrate. I think this is what needs to be done. But it is indicative, I think, of a very isolationist United States that is becoming more isolationist under its America First mantra. And these things are propping up more regularly now. But there's always been an undercurrent of this from the United States. As I say, over half the American population don't travel outside the United States. They don't carry passports.
Dr. Okolo, might I bother you if you could educate us something very small? I'm wondering where these digital content are generated from. Where are their digital origins? Are they from users who perhaps maybe it's collecting data from different people, or is there a very definitive place where data needs to be curled off of that might need oversight or might already have regulation?
Yeah. So are you saying the data being used to train these machine learning models or algorithms? Is that what you're referring to?
I'm not sure about the technical jargon, but what I want to know is
no
exactly how do these materials hit the public? Where do they come from? Who designs them? Maybe I'm trying to look for sense in this mistake here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of times, it can be anywhere from interns to, senior level professionals within the agencies themselves that are generating a lot of these, let's say, public facing.
But I mean digitally. Where they generated from digitally? Is there a dossier where it says this is what Nigeria looks like and this is what it should be represented like digitally?
Yeah. So, I mean, as we consider, what training data is, everything is literally consumed from the internet. And so given that, the maps themselves, present, let's say, a mostly realistic projection, of countries and borders. And this, despite all the historical biases embedded in, the projection of Africa, for example, of its respective size, these maps, generally are right. But the issue is that, the machine learning models, the chatbots, that are built upon them, they work in a stochastic manner. And so they literally just generate information at random. And so even though, again, they have all this training data of maps, to reference, the systems cannot reliably do so. And so that's why it's on the humans to ensure that the output is correct.
All right, thank you for that. Now that we have that answer, Professor Jelili Adebiyi, beyond correcting these maps or these mistakes, what practical steps should the United States actually take to reassure African partners that this does not reflect its broader approach to the continent? Or does it?
I mean, there are steps the United States government could take, and one of these is to look at, do a stock of the current individuals that are working in the U.S. At USAID related agencies, the functional equivalent of USAID as it is currently, and ensure that they have the basic knowledge so require for them to carry out their diplomatic and internationally facing responsibility. Because the assumption, and I think this doesn't just apply to the US, it applies to government worldwide. We've read about the use of AI in fighting wars and how that is actually leading to horrendous decision. And folks continue to push aggressively for government across the world to increase their reliance on the use of artificial intelligence. And what that means is that we need to begin to have that conversation that AI is no substitute, it's no replacement for human expertise. It is meant to aid our decision making. It's another tool out there for us to be able to make a better decision. But the moment it is framed as a substitute for human expertise, things like this, be it in the US or elsewhere, is going to be happening. Then the other thing I really want to touch on is this. And that comes back to the issue, the question you posed to Dr. Okolo. The question is about data. So when you look at the data that is used in training AI infrastructures, who are the people producing the bulk of the knowledge at the core of this data? Most of this knowledge is being produced in the global south. And what that means is that all the errors associated with it, biases, subjectivities, positionality issues are carried over as part of the data used in training such an AI infrastructure. The implication is that when you use this AI infrastructure, all of those concerns will reflect to some extent, depending on what if questions on the final output. And that is why the most important thing to me is not what the US will do differently, is the fact that Africa needs to begin to take the data globally, generating data that will help us mainstream conversation about the development issue affecting us. Are we generating quality, reliable enough data to the extent that even when you look at the issue, other issues beyond the map, you may begin to ask what kind of data did the United States bring to bear
Professor
at that
Adebiyi.
important issue? So these are substantive issues that I think we need to find another time to discuss.
Yes. I don't want you to go too far because I want to go back to Dr. Okolo here and ask, yes, it seems, according to Professor Adebiyi, that Africa seems to be dropping the ball when it comes to its contributions to these data. Or is it that we simply have not been invited to the table, Dr. Okolo?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit a mix of both. Unfortunately, in Nigeria right now, in Lagos, attending one of the most prominent machine learning AI conferences on the continent called Deep Learning and Daba. And there's a plethora of research being produced by African scholars, from whether it focuses on language data sets, image data sets, audio, and these all address some of the pressing questions we've seen in agriculture, in education, and healthcare that have, affected different African communities for decades. And so, however, it does take a lot of resources, particularly money, and also computational resources, other digital resources, to ensure that, this data is actually consumed, and also used or leveraged in models. And a lot of times, these resources aren't available for African, researchers or developers or even companies to scale their products where we can solve some of these issues of underrepresentation.
Well, thank you very much, Professor.
A very quick one about that.
Yes, Professor Adebiyi.
I raised the same issue at the Daba conference last year. I was a keynote speaker in this particular conference. And, and it's the foundational issue in my keynote speech in this particular conference that we need to begin to generate that data, because many of this data we are referring to, they are local level data. A lot of this data nationally, they are not representative. Regionally, they are equally not representative. Why? Because where is the money? What is the value of the money being invested to generate this data? If you spend $1,000 to generate data, you only get $1,000 worth of data. Versus somebody spending $10 million, $20 million, $100 million dollars to generate data. And that is why the data poverty issue in Africa needs to be taken seriously. We rely too much on these international development agencies to support us to generate data. There is no country that will support you to generate data that will move you from developing to developed country. You got to fund your own development.
All right,
you got to fund your own data. So required. And it's when you have quality data. I go to places like Malaysia. Malaysia doesn't have to rely on the United States to generate data for fleshing out deeply national conversation.
Thank you, Professor Adebiyi.
Africa is doing this. Why?
Thank you, Professor Adebiyi. Professor Adebiyi, thank you very much. Africa does have a data poverty problem. Professor David Monda, let's come back to you now. In the midst of all of this, and it is a lot to consume right now, if an African government was to misrepresent Europe or North America so publicly like they've done Africa, do you think the international reaction would have been equally forgiven?
Well, I don't think it would. And I think in most cases, if you think about Lusophone Africa, Francophone Africa, I can speak for Anglophone Africa, right? Most of the former British, probably French and Portuguese and Spanish colonies probably know Europe better than they know their own countries, right? So that would probably be much less likely to happen. But I think also within sort of the broader framework of this AI conversation, I think we really also need to talk about global structural discontinuities, right? And this element of the asymmetrical relationships between information poverty in the global south, broadly spoken, in terms of Africa specifically here, and the plethora of information that's prevalent in the global north. I'll give you an example. For instance, if I'm to do any serious research on Africa, ironically, I have to do it either at a European or an American, institute of research, just because of the challenges around tertiary education and sort of the broader research infrastructures. And this definitely then feeds off into broader questions of asymmetries in terms of knowledge and in terms of this information. And I think that's also another area we really need to recalibrate and more towards this idea of the AU, of regional information hubs, and how does Africa trade and exchange information within the continent to have a bigger voice on the global arena. Because as it stands with these global information discontinuities and with a lot of these asymmetries, we'll continue to have these problems. And Africa will continue to be misrepresented, whether it's through AI or whether it's being a peripheral player within the table or the sanctums of global decision making. This is something we really need to think about on the continent.
Thank you, Professor Monda. Dr. Alex Vines, now this incident occurred during an international AIDS conference. This is where health diplomacy was being discussed. This was the focus. Does this setting make this mistake more consequential than if it had happened elsewhere?
It was a stupid mistake, and I believe that it's to do with the lack of humans involved in this, and it's indicative of the United States cutbacks in their Africa departments. I think that this occurred. My worry remains that this is about education and about humans. And I did listen closely to the previous professor speaking about how African awareness of international geographies is better than, say, Europeans or Americans. That may be the case, but my experience in the classroom, I'm a professor at a university, is that actually younger Africans are also weakening in terms of their geographical awareness. And so, if I were to ask them where Iceland is or Liechtenstein or Switzerland, they would struggle. And my worry is that we actually need to really bolster our education for younger people globally to be able to question what they read on AI, what they read through the internet, what they get through their smartphones. This is a broader problem. It's not just one that's siloized towards Africa. And so the key is education and critical thinking, particularly critical thinking to problematize when something doesn't look right and know where to go and find a way to remedy it.
Well, Dr. Vines, this might be my last question to you. As the world continues to embrace more AI, I'm wondering whether this might be the final or the last time we'll see this kind of mistake, or are we bracing up for more?
Oh, we're going to see more mistakes, but I think the State Department of the United States will be more cautious. I do think humans learn from mistakes, and there's learning by doing. And my own view is a bit optimistic that we've reached a real low point, and that there will be some improvements in the US administration in terms of the way that it handles and thinks about Africa. I think that's the positive out of this, but it's a dreadful mistake that occurred. Can't believe that map. It's just unbelievable.
Well, I will tell you something about the U.S. State Department. They need a Africa department, that's for sure. Dr. Okolo, my final question this evening. Who should ultimately be held accountable when AI generates contents causing diplomatic embarrassment like this one? Is it the software developers? Is it the institution deploying it? Or is it the officials who approved it?
Yes, I would say nowadays, most, if not all, chatbot platforms and other AI platforms, mention outright that the outputs, of their respective, promptings, will not be correct, and that you should always verify. And so at this point, it's really, on the State Department itself and, officials involved, in the respective trip and overviewing or having oversight, over the presentation. That have the responsibility for this blunder. And they have, seemed to take responsibility for the most part.
All right. Okay. Professor Adebiyi, in one sentence, what's the biggest lesson this controversy offers governments around the world?
AI is not a subject matter expert. AI is not a geography expert. The real experts are human beings. It is human beings that generate data that AI relies on. So we can't replace human being expertise built over the years with algorithmic, so to say, expertise. That is the lesson. We need to invest more in building and consolidating human expertise. And these must not be traded off for artificial intelligence in policy making and diplomatic ecosystems.
Okay. Professor Monda, should Africa wait to be invited to this table when it comes to data sharing, or should they become more aggressive in putting out their own data?
Definitely Africa becoming more aggressive in putting out their own data. But I think more importantly also Africa looking at itself as having agency, right? So Africa cannot continue just to be a consumer of information. Africa also needs to generate its own information, and Africa has agency, should generate its own information, should generate its own content, should have ownership of that content, intellectual property around that content, and control around how that content is distributed, is disaggregated, and broader questions around surveillance, around ethical issues of AI, and also around bringing human beings back into the conversation. I think are important elements in thinking about AI and the continent. Africa definitely has to take a forward step. Africa has to be brought back into the conversation, but Africa can only do that when Africa sees itself as not a benign actor, but having agency within this broader AI conversation.
Gentlemen and lady, I would like to say thank you for such an interesting conversation with all of you. Thank you very much, Professor Jelili Adebiyi, Development Scholar Practitioner from Michigan, US, and of course, Dr. Alex Vines, Program Director, Africa European Council of Foreign Relations from London. And let's not forget Dr. Chinasa Okolo, our very own founder and scientific director, Technecultura, Washington, and Dr. Seydina Moussa, who has left us now. The connection was pretty bad, but thank you very much for joining us. Head a live research group, Cheikh Hamidou Kane Digital University in Dakar, Senegal. And of course, Professor David Monda, thank you very much, sir, Professor of Political Science, City University of New York in New York, United States. Gentlemen and lady, thank you for such an interesting conversation. No AI was used in the presentation of this program, I'd like to assure you, and all questions were original. And I'm sure that we will continue to have oversight when it comes to our use of AI. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
That's all for today's One Slot. Catch up on missed episodes on News Central TV YouTube channel. You can also watch News Central Live on DSTV channel 422, Go TV channel 23, Star Times 274, Able TV, and of course on YouTube. Until I come your way, again, my name is Mazino Appeal.